Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're based. I'm sure with testing and especially testing in Salesforce, we've got a global audience tuning in. I'm here with Richard. Richard, where are you based actually?
I'm down on the south coast. For those that know Brighton and Hastings, I'm in between two, somewhere called Bexhill-on-Sea. I think I'm the youngest person on my street. Actually, it's quite a older generation down here, but nice and quiet. So, other than barking dogs and a few meowing cats, we shouldn't get too much noise this afternoon.
Your cats and your dogs?
Indeed, all mine, but obviously every neighbour has them these days, don't they? Post COVID, everyone's got a pet,
Yeah,
not just the goldfish anymore.
yeah. Well, over because it's dinner time for them, for my cats. I've made sure they're fed. So yeah, I'm a cat lady. Great. So shall we kick this off? So like I said, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a popular topic, a global, something that affects everybody, building on Salesforce. And, testing can mean different things to different people. And having worked with Richard to prepare this webinar, I am sure that you're going to learn a lot about testing. I learned some things, and I've been in the Salesforce world for a number of years. So yeah, really looking forward to sharing what you know, Richard.
Thank you, Lucy. So let me sort of dive straight in. Looks like most people have joined already. We've got a good attendance here,
Mm-hmm.
but I won't go too fast for those that are late. So let's think about, first of all, when we talk about testing, people often, introductions. I forgot our introductions. How about that?
No worries, no
So
worries.
Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself first for those that don't know?
Yeah, I mean, you're the star of the show, but I'll do a quick introduction. So I'm Lucy Mazelon. I head up operations at SalesforceBen. My role is basically gluing together everything that happens in our fast-paced company. And, the Salesforce world doesn't stop, doesn't doesn't sleep. So we're always challenged with new innovations, new things to talk about. And sorry, Richard, before you introduce yourself, I just wanted to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded. Your lines are muted, and the recording will be available shortly after on Provar's YouTube channel. And you'll also receive a follow-up email. Just wanted to also ask anything. Richard said he wants to be challenged. So go for it, Richard.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, so there's a Q&A button on your Zoom controls. Rather than use the chat, put things in the Q&A and we'll get to those. But Lucy's going to keep me honest throughout. So my role at Provar is Chief Strategy Officer. You may think, what does he know about testing? Well, actually, that covers developer relations. It covers our partnerships. It covers our M&A strategy. It covers our growth plans for business, how we look ahead to the future. And market fit's a big part of that. What are people wanting to do with our products? Where does our products need to go to be relevant to our users? So one of the ways we look at that is understanding in the first place, when people talk about testing, why do they need to test? What's the point? And for many customers, the first reason is often compliance. So if you're in a regulated industry, such as financial services, life sciences, government, it's not an option to test. You have to test, and you have to have evidence that you have tested. And then for everyone else, we have regulations such as GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, various different HIPAA for life sciences, various different regulatory requirements saying actually these are the things you have to have proof that you've tested. But even if you're not in those industries, I think we've all been on projects. I was a consultant before. I know, Lucy, you are still doing some work, maybe on your own org like me. But we all have requirements from our users, okay? And when we get those requirements, in the form of user stories or use cases or whatever methodology you use, you usually have some acceptance criteria. So to prove this works, it has to do A, B, C, D. So we always do testing, and it might be manual, but you definitely test. And then when we then hand it to a user, we're asking them to say this works. We do user acceptance to sign off and say, yep, that does exactly what I want. Or what we normally find out is there's all the things they didn't tell you they wanted at the start, then might come to light. I think we've all experienced that. And then when we think about things like performance isn't just something we do once. If you're implementing Salesforce and the save button on opportunity takes 8 seconds, you've probably got a performance problem somewhere to look at. And I can probably tell you where it probably is as well. Equally, if you've got a page and on that page, maybe there's opportunity stage and the close date, there's 300 fields between them. That's probably not a good user experience for your sales team when they're trying to close a deal. And so we want to be able to look at things like that and measure the quality, and we measure quality through testing. And then we talk about risk avoidance. Every one of us has a different business, and each of our businesses have different attitudes to risk. That might be you're an e-commerce platform like Amazon, and you want to risk that people can't take orders. That might be you're running a contact center, and you want to avoid the risk that 2,000 or 20,000 contact center agents can't accept any customer calls or process any cases. Assuming those things aren't issues for you, when you do get an issue in production, when you do have a problem or a bug, you want to verify that's been fixed. So you've got typically steps to repeat. You've then found the problem, you fix the problem, maybe done a hot deployment, maybe done a change to production like I've done before directly. And then you want to prove to people that it still works. Because the last thing you want when you fix the bug is that bug to come back again 3, 4, 5 weeks later. And then the final part of it is testing is really if you're thinking about when you want to make a change, if you're planning to put a business case together or you're raising a change request, you want to understand what impact that's going to have. So if I do this change, what do we think could go wrong, or what areas do we need to verify to make sure we're happy it hasn't gone wrong? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just nodding along as you were talking about it. And what came to mind, it seems like what's on this slide, there are so many different people involved, multiple different types of Salesforce roles. But at the end of the day, testing, all these aspects gels it together, lots of different people working with each other. So, who do you think is watching and who would find this useful?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think typically business analysts are often the people who have to then justify why they're testing. If you're a team where you have a quality manager, you'll be owning not just the testers doing the testing, but actually responsible for the quality of what's hit in production, often measured by the number of bugs in production. But ultimately, it's the stakeholder. The stakeholder is the person who has endorsed and paid the budget for the system. They don't want to spend more money than necessary fixing it. What they want to get out of the platform like Salesforce and other products is the features to enable their business to have competitive advantage. So yeah, everyone should be involved in some way to understand about testing, because through testing, you can measure the quality of something.
That's a great starting point for us to continue, I think.
Cool.
And so, I just want to say, this is the first of many great diagrams that you'll see in this presentation. The Provar team have done a really good job to demystify some of these things. So go on, Richard.
Thank you, Lucy. It's a team effort as well. This isn't all me. I've cribbed things from across our whole company here. So back in the 70s, IBM did a study that said if a bug hits production, it's going to cost you 100 times more to fix it in production than it would if you caught it at the design stage. And you'll see here I've only got 30. Why is that? Well, in 1970, we were using valve computers and maybe some printed circuit boards and software methodology was generally waterfall. Things have changed quite a lot since. Unfortunately, though, it's still, on most studies, 30 times more expensive. The cost of actually fixing a bug once it's hit production is 30 times more than if you were somehow to shift left. And we'll talk more about shift left and shift right. The further left you can shift, the cheaper it is to fix that bug. So if you are able to identify it at the impact analysis stage, that's fantastic. If you're able to identify the risk and mitigate it then in the design, that's the cheapest way to avoid that bug. But the further across you go, the cheaper that cost is to fix that bug based on when you detected it. Okay. And then another way of looking at this, we've all done projects. And when we implement a new system, be it Salesforce or anything else, I think in that release one, everyone's very excited. It's the new product, it's the new system. Everyone wants to give their input. Everyone wants to give some feedback. And whether you use manual testing or automated testing, you probably have a very high coverage rate. You've probably been over it with fine-tooth comb, that when opportunities are closed won, the order's going into the order processing system, the fulfillment center is still shipping the goods. It's got the right address on for the customer. When a customer wants to make a return, it's sent back to the right place for the right product. You get very high engagement. When it's time for phase two, though, As a system integrator, you might be thinking, that's great, phase 2, right? Maybe it's 30% of the size of the original project, only 30% of the resources. So you spend all your time on the new stuff, but you're basically starting to create a risk. And that risk is you haven't regression tested what was there before. You might do some smoke testing, you might sniff around a bit. People might do a little bit of exploratory testing. Sorry, my earbuds are falling out suddenly. I don't know why. Must be the temperature. Just rearrange them. And then you've got maybe a change request. So change request is much smaller, and another change request. So the more changes we do, the areas in pink are what you're focused on delivering. Those are the things the customer wants to pay for changing. They don't really want to pay for you to retest everything every time. They expect you not to break anything when you're doing that. So whether you're an in-house delivery team, or you're a system integrator or an individual consultant, it's really important you understand how you can solve that regression gap. And that's where we normally talk about automated testing for your regression testing to solve that dark blue area.
Absolutely. And I remember, Richard, when I first saw this, I said, wow, this one really speaks to me. I can really understand that concept and how great that existing code base gets in proportion to the small changes that you're actually making. And I compared it to an iceberg, right? The iceberg gets bigger. You only see a little bit, but actually there's a whole lot underneath that you may not have considered.
Yeah, I didn't have the creative skills to turn this into an iceberg after your comments, but I will be stealing that for Dreamforce. Thank you. So I want to briefly talk about test approaches. So this may be something familiar to people, the concept of black box, grey box, and white box testing. So if you think about black box testing, you don't know what's inside the box. It's completely opaque to you. So if you think about an end user who hasn't been trained in your application is doing black box testing, they actually often break an application because they don't know how to use it. They'll do things you don't expect. They'll start doing a checkout button and they'll hit cancel. What? Why they hit cancel? Not supposed to hit cancel then. Or they'll close the window. They do things you don't expect. And we call that black box testing. And there is a place for it when we talk about testing. There's a discipline called exploratory testing, where you give someone a time box. You say within this 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever you want to set, the clock starts running, and you give them a scope saying, go here and basically see what you can find and record your observations. That's the type of testing. It's incredibly valuable. And it's typically, well, it pretty much has to be manual today. Then we've got things like grey box testing. This is where tools like Provar are often used already by customers. So we want to do some integration testing between systems. We know when we put data into Marketing Cloud, whichever it's called. I never remember what it's called. Any part of Marketing Cloud or HubSpot or anything else. We know we expect certain things to then appear in Salesforce. We don't know how it gets there. You probably have the expertise. I don't know how it gets from A to B, but I know it should appear as a lead or a contact. I know the rules of what happens, but I don't know how it does it. But I know I can observe and I can check that's working. In the same way, when I'm regression testing, I don't need to be a developer. I don't need to see the source code of an Apex class. I don't have to see the contents of a flow. I can test that it does with the inputs I give it and the expected outputs that come out for it. So that's grey box testing. And then white box testing is when you really get into it. So typically the delivery team, if you're an Apex developer, you have to write a unit test. You have to look at the code and cover every scenario, make sure you've got enough coverage and that you're asserting what's happening. If you're developing Lightning Web Components, you should be doing that, but the reality is different. And if you're doing flows, again, flow testing is there, but typically you would just run it or hit the debug. Is that working? Yeah, until you get all those emails flying in after it hits production. But white box testing is really that bit where you get under the covers. You have that deep knowledge about the application, so you know what could go wrong and you can verify for it. And one of the ways you can verify isn't always just about running a test. Sometimes it's about running a static analysis. So things like Code Analyzer, things like the Salesforce Optimizer and the setup menu is a static analysis tool, things like Clayton. So there's a number of tools you can use to do that white box testing to look at the quality of an application.
That's really, a really good way and a nice visual as well. My question would be, I'm sure everybody's done some form of UAT, whether they've been the one conducting it and organizing it, the one, reviewing the results, or the one actually testing. Where would that fall on this scale of boxes?
So UAT should be grey box testing, because you would say to someone, this is the process, this is what we expect to see. But what you tend to get, and it is valuable, you get some exploratory, you get some black box testing out of it as well. So they'll go off script. And you don't want to discourage that too much. It depends on your role. If you're in-house, it's good. If you're a system integrator who's got a payment based on passing UAT, it can be terrible. And that's why you don't want to wait for them to do it. And one of the things we do with automation testing, one of the benefits, business case, is if you go into UAT and you hand someone a report and you've already tested 300 scenarios, they can go, yeah, that looks right, tick. That does happen. And they may then choose to do the exploratory testing on top, but they haven't spent hours and hours of boring work following a script. Enter that value, click OK, enter that value, hit OK. Because invariably they will make a mistake. That's the issue with manual testing. They'll make a mistake. And then you're suddenly in that black box testing scenario, and they won't necessarily realize there was a mistake until you've then gone through and went, whoa, hang on. Why did they put a dot in every field? Oh, no, dot's not a number. Or is it? It's 0.0. So yeah, you get issues.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
Cool. So bit daunting, this diagram, but this was a concept, Agile Testing Quadrants, created by a gentleman called Brian Marek. And then there's the Bible of testing. Anyone in the QA space will know the book by Lisa Crispin, Agile Testing. And in that, she just modified it slightly to put some tooling around that. But what they were both saying is that testing isn't something your QA team does or one person in your team does, like you said at the start. It's a shared responsibility. So they divided up the different types of testing into 4 quadrants. And there's no sequence between this. Yes, Q1, Q2, it doesn't start at Q1. All these things can happen in parallel, should happen in parallel in an ideal project. But what they did is categorize them. And if we look at the text along the side, so I'm just going to try and annotate that. Let's see if I can put a spotlight on that. Okay, so we see here business facing. So Q2 and Q3, these are sorts of things a business user would be interested in doing, give them feedback on. Things like when you build a design prototype to walk through. It could be a landing page for a marketing cloud page. It could be a brand new application or a mobile app. Likewise, user acceptance, they're business-facing types of tests. On the right, we also see Q3 and Q4 are critiquing the product. So we're getting feedback about the thing that we've built or the application we've configured. On the bottom, Q1, Q4, it's technology. It's typically the technology team, especially the developers and the DevOps engineers and the infrastructure engineers, are doing unit tests and component tests and performance testing. And when we're talking about ILITY testing, we're talking about all the other non-functionals. And one of the ILITY testing areas actually is testability. How testable is this application? So that's an interesting one, as well as things like the usability and things like that. And then on the left-hand side, we have Q1 and Q2 are guiding the development. So when we're going through a development process early on, we're making decisions based on the feedback we get from those results about improving the application or removing technical debt, or making decisions to say, do you know what? Yeah, it's not perfect, but we're going to go with it anyway. And all I've done is take these clouds in the corner, basically gave an opinion on what types of tooling you'd use. So unit and component tests can be automated. What I think is different and exciting now, and we'll talk about this later, is AI can play a big role in this area, in this quadrant 1. Likewise, quadrant 2, typically these things have been done manually. You can capture results, but you can use tools like Provar to automate them. And then these softer skills over here, they typically are manual tests, those exploratory tests we've talked about, user acceptance test. When we give someone an alpha or a beta for a product, we'd probably ask them for manual results back. But again, I think we can use AI there to enhance it. So these are the different ways we can use different tools and how we can categorize them. And if you've heard about any of these things, all these things are types of testing.
Amazing. Yes, I forgot to drop that teaser in at the beginning, but yes, we will be talking about AI later on. Thank you for talking us through that. Again, drop your questions into the chat, because I know this was a very comprehensive slide. Richard, you did a great job of taking us through, but just a reminder, everybody, the slides will be sent out after the session in a follow-up email and will be available on Provar's YouTube channel.
Thank you. Okay, so What's next? So I talked about automated testing, and you asked me some good questions earlier, Lucy. You mentioned about, well, what do you mean by a coded framework? What do you mean by traditional automated testing? So I've added this example in here. Now, if you were testing an application, even Salesforce, you can do this. So on the right-hand side, and now I'm a developer originally, okay, I don't get to develop much anymore, but even I don't like looking at this, okay? And do you know what this is doing? All it's doing is using it's automating the Salesforce login page. That's all. That's how many lines of code it takes to put in username, password, and clicking a login button. And it's using it it's data driven. So it's using an Excel file to get which user it wants to test, and it's getting which password for that user from the same file. And the reason we use data is because actually we want to test the different users. So it isn't straightforward to do this, but you often see this for functional smoke testing, regression testing. So we're basically having developers writing code to test the user interface. And if everything's written by a developer, that's not too bad. But in Salesforce, more than half an application, I'd say 80% of an application comes from the admins and the functional consultants, implementation consultants. The whole point is we're using clicks, not code. So why on earth would we get a developer to write code to check our configuration works? But there are free frameworks that make things easier. Salesforce provide one themselves. This absolutely helps. But free isn't free because you've got the effort and the person to maintain this afterwards. So let me go into that a bit more abstract then. If we had a traditional application, let's say I built my first web page, okay, everything on that web page I'm in control of. Every single piece of HTML markup I put in a file somewhere. Every piece of data that comes into it, I control what color it appears as, what icons are used, where it positions on the page. I've got complete control over that. So any tests I write in code are going to work. They're going to keep working until I change that page, and I'll know I've changed that page. So generally very reliable, very robust, very easy to test if you've got a developer. Salesforce is not like that, is it? In fact, Salesforce say in their own developer guide, and I still haven't checked those Winter 24 release notes yet, but it's normally in there. It says the content and structure of HTML, CSS, and the DOM, like the structure of the page, in Lightning can change at any time, not 3 times per year, but any time. So weekly patches, for example, and it can't be considered a stable API. So if we took that first approach, that code, that login page, there's no guarantee the username and password and the login button is there. MFA takes that away, for example. So when we're building on Salesforce, we're generally using clicks, not code. Even if we're using Lightning Web Components, even if we're building flows, even if we're writing Apex, we cannot control what Salesforce puts out on our browsers or customers' browsers, and different browsers, different devices. We're not in control. That is rendered by Salesforce.
Makes sense.
So the tests keep working until Salesforce updates. So your test will work until there's change, but you don't know when that's going to happen. You can't rely on it being 3 times a year. But of course, we've got one coming up this weekend, so it's very timely on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when that hits, when you're in that situation that you're having to change your tests because they've stopped working, your application may work fine, but you're having to maintain your tests. We call that rework spiral. And the more things you cover with your tests, the more technical debt you're building up, and the more work to get everything working every time there's a release. So there will be teams this weekend who start work and will be working for the next 4 weeks to make sure they've got a clean report on Salesforce before it hits production. But they cannot stop production happening. They cannot stop a production deployment. They need to get a clean health check over the next 4 weeks. So testing and fixing tests instead of the customization. So we're basically not ensuring the quality of our application. We're trying to ensure the quality of our tests. That's not good. Our tests have become more fragile than the customizations. But the good news is this is not the only way. Salesforce is unique as well, as you're more than aware, and I'm sure our audience is quite educated on this. Me and you, Lucy, I think remember before Classic. I remember when Classic was new. I don't remember the one before that. I mean, Aloha 2 is what I remember. Classic used to be called Aloha 3. Then Lightning came along. Lightning, how much has Lightning changed in 8 years? Yeah, the icons used to be down the left-hand side. They changed all of Marketing Cloud to match. And then Core went and changed back to tabs after that was done. They went, oh, okay, well, I like the icons. And I think something new's coming. In fact, I've got some reliable information, something new's coming. I'm not saying it's a replacement for Lightning. I know there's an evolution of Lightning coming as well. There's some changes, maybe some new components, new styling. We've seen some changes. Every Salesforce org is different. If you're like me, every one of my sandboxes is different. No two sandboxes are the same. That's a problem to manage. People make changes in different areas, bring them together. We've got dynamic everything on a page now, dynamic fields, dynamic related lists. It's fantastic. I can show a field based on the value of another field. I can show a field based on the permission that someone has. Every user can have a completely different experience. And when we talk about things like element identifiers, what we're talking about there is the markup on the page, how we say that's a button, how we say that's an input field, how we say it's a link is different depending on where you are in the application. It can be in Lightning, it can be in Classic, and it can be in even older than Classic view, depending where you go and set up. So all these things, govern limits, meta APIs, multiple sandbox and issues, but that's only half the list. Permissions, pop-ups, process automation, profiles, shadow DOM, standard and console apps. You'd think if you built a test that worked in a standard app, you could just switch it to console and it'd still work. No, these frames play a part. The navigation is completely different. You don't want to create two tests, one to check when the Sales Cloud's in standard app and one to check it in a console app. That would be crazy. And then we've got related lists and list views. And if you want to find a record, that record may not be in the first page. You might have to scroll that list to find that record. You may have to go to the 7th page to find that record. This is quite hard to test with traditional tools. But the problem isn't Salesforce. The problem is the tools people are using. So this is Provar automation. So it's a little animated GIF, very simple. What we're doing, we're testing the lead page. So it's a new lead pop-up window. Yeah, pop-ups are another thing again. We're interacting with the company field. We point and click just as easy as it is to use Salesforce. We're understanding that's the company field, and we're capturing that in our test. We're asking you the value, which can be a literal value, or it can be coming out one of those spreadsheets, and we're telling it to click the save button. It's that easy to create a step with Provar automation. I've got a video coming up in a minute, which goes into more detailed end-to-end, but any questions on the difference between automation and coded frameworks?
Yes, sure. I was about to ask you before we move on, do you want to take a question? Because it's relating to, it was a couple of slides back. So tests are more fragile than customizations. Would you mind, should we skip back a couple? So there's some context, because it's a longer question. Okay, great. So they've said it's very interesting. Does that mean we expect to see more false defects, i.e. not actual defects when there's a new release, but instead our tests break, and so we have to spend time fixing the tests themselves?
Exactly the point. So that's exactly what happens. If you're using a coded framework, not Provar, when I add, that's the problem you would have. When that release comes out, maybe you've got your own internal framework. What the team's doing, instead of actually finding what's wrong with their application, they're finding what's wrong with their tests. So we'd call that a false negative. The test is failing, but it may not be your application that's failing, if that makes sense. It maybe can't find the button. So the technical part is you'll typically see something like element not found errors. Can't find the thing we used to click on. Not on the page anymore. I don't recognize what it is. And when we're talking about locators, we're talking about that mapping, that thing to say, this is a button. This is the login button. This is the save button. This is the new button.
Great, thank you. There's a lot more questions coming in, but I think we'll save the majority of the ones about Provar to later after the video.
We will have time, everyone, for questions. So I think we're going to be about 10 more minutes on slides, and we'll have 20 minutes left for all the questions. But yeah, feel free to keep popping any more in as we go.
You're very popular, Richard.
Good. So let's start thinking about, we talked about business cases earlier, and I think you had a friend that had a question about building a business case. Is that right, Lucy?
Yes. So she's just joined a new company, head of Salesforce, and she's like, I know we need regression testing, but on top of all the other priorities that she has, it's a new implementation, by the way, and they're releasing constantly. how do I build that business case? So I think you've got the answers here.
Yeah, so I like a nice 2x2. Who doesn't? We all know we can ignore the bottom left, isn't that right? So if the level of complexity is high, okay, so maybe there's lots of code. Flow, I'd put maybe midway on that scale. If everything's in flows, I actually find it hard to debug flows than code, but that's the difference between me and an admin. Admins are far better at that than me. And the impact on your business, a really key metric. So what is the impact of your business of this failing? If it's low, okay, then manual testing is probably fine. If it's low in both those things. If you actually have a lot of code, though, you're going to struggle to do manual testing. You're going to be doing, imagine spending the next 4 weeks just testing the Winter 24 impact. That'd be terrible, let alone any changes that you're making yourself to your application at the same time. So there is a place for coded automation that we talked about at the start. That does play a role. If you've got a development team and everything's written by developers, yeah, that can work as long as you know you're going to incur this effort every time there's a Salesforce release and possibly a break on a weekly patch. Likewise, if your level of complexity is quite low, there's still a business case for using declarative automation like Provar, the point and click, or manual testing, because actually if its impact on your business is very high, you need a very fast turnaround. Declarative regression testing makes a lot of sense. But if both of those things are high, you should only use a tool like Provar, and other vendors are available. And what we see from those customers, if you go to the Provar website, there's a whole bunch of case studies, is typically the things they're measuring is the amount of coverage they've got. They've reduced their risk by having more coverage of their testing. They've taken less effort, 21 times less effort, one customer. That might even have been Salesforce themselves, that one. 56% less bugs hitting production. So we talked at the start about the cost of fixing bugs. If we can halve the number of bugs in production, that's a big cost saving. And then actually undertaking the testing, once you've built your test cases, 4 to 12 times faster than doing it manually. But I will just add, if you're doing it once, manual testing's fine. I only need to check it once. Yeah, do it manually. If you're ever going to run it twice, 3 times. And so I always talk about this as another version of the same chart, is the level of customization, how you've done it, against the frequency of change. So even if it is not the business risk or the business value, how often are you changing it? So your friend, they're doing very frequent changes. That's a lot of time, a lot of boring time spent doing manual testing if they don't have any automation.
Yeah, agreed. And it goes back to that regression gap as well. You know, as time goes on and they're developing out their org, it's only going to get more towards the top.
Absolutely. So looking at DevOps, people often ask that, well, what's the role of testing in DevOps? And I say it's everywhere. We call it continuous testing, and I didn't invent it. Smarter than people than me did. We see a lot of tools in the Salesforce ecosystem and say, DevOps, we're DevOps. And then maybe doing release management. Some of them are doing DevOps as well. But typically we would start with a sort of planning. So we'd be thinking about what are the things we're going to do. And at the end of planning, remember, we do something like a design review. If you remember our Agile Testing quadrants, we actually usually look at user stories, we review them and say, are there any gaps? So we actually are doing testing at that point. Is there anything we forgot about? And will this work? Have we got some mock-ups for the user? Do they understand what we're going to do? We then create or build things, and hopefully we create those unit tests at the same time. The traditional role of verification and testing happens after that. You've made a change, or then given it time to say, does this work? Does it do what it's supposed to do? We would also then do that regression testing we talked about. So we want to make sure we didn't break anything else in the same process. That doesn't have to be that release 2, release 3. That can be even the previous story. So I had a validation rule, suddenly no one created a new account. I'm sure we've all experienced that. Someone's added a new mandatory field and it's not on the page, or a new validation rule that makes a field mandatory and no one put it on the page layout. I'm sure we've all faced that issue before. And we've packaged it, we've released it into an environment. We want to test it works in that environment with that environment's data. We don't just want to rely on it working within our test system. How many times have we all heard the statement, it works on my machine? Well, with Salesforce, it works on my Scratch org, it works on my sandbox. It must be your problem. Not great. And once it's in production, or once it's in a full sandbox, we want to think about performance of it with real data. How does it perform in an acceptable way? Does it scale? When it's in production, we don't just stop testing. We think about monitoring. We think about security. We think about that issue verification. So if I do a hot fix, has that bug come back in production or not? And when I sort of summarize that, we are bringing the terms shift left and shift right. So if you're shifting left, you're moving further around earlier in the life cycle to do more testing, right? So trying to reduce that cost to test. If you're shifting right, it doesn't make it more expensive, surprisingly. What you're doing is monitoring what's happening. Is the feature being used? Is it being adopted? Because if we spend all that time building something and no one uses it, why did we do it? We didn't get any business value out of it. If no one's using it, maybe they can't reach it. Maybe there's an issue with documentation. Maybe we didn't tell anyone about the feature. And if it's not working in production, we want to know through verification as soon as possible so we can fix those issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it's a really good diagram. I've never seen that. I don't know what you call it. Sometimes it's a fish, isn't it? What did you call it? Sorry, the spiral?
No. It's the infinity strip or the Mobius strip.
Yes, that's it. But I've never seen it with the different types of testing around it as well. Really good.
This is why we get upset when people say, oh, you don't need test here. And for a lot of people, that's where you start. That's a great place to start. If you're not doing that, start there for sure. And then do the shift left to do the shift right to expand the amount of testing you're doing and keep records of it. So that's a nice segue to me talk about the products that Provar has. So we're best known for our automation product, okay? All our products are the only products designed for Salesforce. Yes, you can test other things as well. That's not an accident, that's needed. We don't all only run on Salesforce. People have Jira, we have Google, we have other systems, we have email. But Provar Manager, we recently launched last year as our 100% native app. It's available in App Exchange, it's a free trial. And it's about taking all those things we just saw within this infinity strip, this Mobius strip, and actually having records of it. What did we do? What manual testing did we do? What static analysis tools did we use? And by measuring it, we can track it over time and learn lessons about it. So we have that 360-degree view that we all crave. On the automation side, it's a market-leading product. It's data-driven. We have very high reuse. You reuse the same test with different profiles, or more likely for different combinations of permission sets or permission set groups. And it can be integrated into your DevOps pipeline if you're using a GearSet, Capado, a Flowsum, a AutoRabbit, Prodly, how many other tools are there? All those things can basically control the automation, integrate the information, or you're not using a Salesforce product, you're using one of the things like a Jenkins server. But yeah, so it's really important to sort of remind people we have the managers for the whole delivery team. So everyone that's interested in looking at quality, and for the people that do testing, we have the automation product for the QA teams that lets them build, debug, and build those test packs. And when I talked about testing, so when I'm talking about testing Salesforce, I don't just mean Sales and Service Cloud and platform. We've got field service, CPQ, industry clouds, Slack even. Whatever acquisition happens in the next 3 months, I'm sure. We also test things outside it. So people might be integrating their Workday or their SAP or Boo Dynamics or things like NetSuite. And beyond those things, we all have emails. We have emails coming out of our systems. We want to check that the contents of an email are correct. And there's no, if you follow my Twitter or LinkedIn feeds, I'll often post about, especially Salesforce sending emails with merge fields that aren't substituted. I actually got a reaction out of someone at Salesforce recently. They asked why I was doing that and was I trying to be negative? I was actually, no, I'm making a point that even Salesforce don't test those things. And on that email, you might have an attachment. We can look inside the attachment, the PDF, and check the fields in the PDF as well. Or you may have a result in a database somewhere or a spreadsheet. Wherever it exists, we can actually look at it and we can assert that the testing has worked. Sorry, that the system has worked. We can test it.
That's really good. Sorry, Richard, just because I think that answers a couple of questions that people had. If we just briefly go back to the other slide. I'll try go through them. Does Provar support Classic and Lightning? Yes.
Yes.
Can Provar test?
With the same test. So Classic and Lightning with the same test, it will work.
Nice.
Which was unique to us.
Digital experiences? I think that's like Experience Cloud and...
yes, we support Experience Cloud. So where things get interesting with things like Experience Cloud is not every Salesforce application has metadata in. So when I haven't really played we talked about metadata much, but Provar uses metadata instead of using the DOM, the HTML being brittle on the page. So we know what to test. Where that's not available, because maybe you've put a custom HTML element, or you've put a frame, another web app inside Salesforce, we can still locate things, and we give people a range of options. The name of the field, the ID of the field may be robust because it's not being controlled by Salesforce, the label of the field. But when you're making those decisions, you make decisions based on, okay, if I use label, am I going to want to test this in Russian as well as English? I'm going to want to test it in Japanese and French and German. So you have to make decisions around that. But yes, it supports all those things.
Great. And another one, as we're on this slide, do you offer mobile testing?
We do mobile web app testing, so we can test the application on a mobile browser. The one I get most asked about is Salesforce Mobile. Mm-hmm. So we used to test Salesforce Mobile, and Salesforce made us change their mobile app, and then it's no longer available as what we call a developer build, a developer signed build. Getting a bit technical there. So if you want to test on mobile, yes, you can do it, but not with that point and click interface. You have to effectively get under the covers and use what you call our Provar automation SDK to do it. It doesn't have the same usability benefits, but that's the same as any other product.
Yeah, seems like you thought of everything. Does the tool work with Visualforce page layouts or non-out-the-box features? Yeah. Yes,
and actually one of the first features, so I met the founders at Provar in 2013, before there was a Provar. And they were saying to me, we're trying to test these visual pages, but this ID keeps changing. Every time I edit the page, it changes. Like, yeah, don't use the VF_ID. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. Use the metadata. And that's where the metadata stuff came from. I wasn't working for Provar at the time. I said, no, don't do it that way, because it will change. It's generated by Salesforce. Visualforce, very, very good at testing. Visualforce, Aura, Lightning Web Components, or your custom framework, React, Angular, whatever. We can test all those.
Nice. All right, we can go through the other questions later. Those were just like the quick fire ones about Provar and in relation to Salesforce products.
Okay, so I've got a short video here. I'm going to play it. You can tell me to stop at any points. But so for the audience, you're the second set of people to see this draft video for Dreamforce in a less than a month now, 3 weeks. I did also play it last Tuesday, an event. So apologies. But yeah, you're the first global audience to see this. So I'm just going to talk through this. So this is Provar Manager. We can see it's a Salesforce application with some customizations that's guiding you through how to set up a good test project, how to create a test plan. And when we're looking at a test plan, we're not just thinking about tests, we're thinking about what's our approach, what are the risks we're mitigating, what procedures are we following, who are the team members, who are the resources. And we also think about what are the tools we want to integrate. Do we want to integrate Jira, Capado, Flowsum, DevOps Center? So we're one of the first products to support DevOps Center as well. And we really want to collect data over time. So we're looking at improvements. When I'm talking about quality improvements, we're looking at what things we're encouraging, what are different types of testing we're doing, how is that changing over time. And when we're looking at that, we can measure things like defects in production, how many bugs is inside Salesforce. You look at how many cases are raised, or how many Jira tickets. We're able to not just observe, though, we can also execute. So we can create tests to run, like unit tests, Provar tests, third-party tests. We can schedule those to run. And we saw early on the brief video of the Provar automation, when we're using it to capture values, when we're interacting with the screen, we do it from within Salesforce. When we create our tests, they are resilient. This is actually capturing the metadata of the page. It's looked at that page. It knows it's the Salesforce lead homepage. It knows what's available. And when I talked about end-to-end testing, absolutely, we've got several case studies where customers have used us, not only on Salesforce, but across other products as well.
Absolutely.
Brief time for a breather.
Yeah, I can say something that stood out to me is that everything's a record. So it's fully reportable. It can be also, if business users get nosy, you can pull them a report to show them exactly what is going on, slice and dice using reports and dashboards. I thought that was really nice.
Power of the platform. And when we have things like data cloud in the future, it'll be, you've got the data on there. You can add approval workflows. You can do all the same customizations you do to your business applications. You can do it to Provar Manager as well. So this is briefly another exciting feature we've got with DevOps Center, and we can do it with other partner products as well, where we have our test cases that can, because they understand metadata, when a change is promoted, when it's released within things like DevOps Center or Flowsome, we're able to automatically run the tests and give feedback on that environment for those tests when that change is made. And we call that quality pipeline. We're just going to pause this as well. What we've also recently added, people ask about AI, and we'll talk about AI next in the time we have available. We're able to take a user story, say from Jira or Azure DevOps or wherever you store it, Agile Accelerator, and actually analyze that using GPT integration and generate a list of the scenarios that you might want to test. And from that, you can click import and it will create you those templates for test cases of things that need to be automated. Once you're in our automation products, your QA team can then take those tests and they can generate automatically something that's going to automatically go through that page and run all the tests and allow you to run that data-driven testing. The other big thing about our test builder automation testing is that it's interactive. Okay, this isn't a recorder. You can go through it, you can stop, you can rewind, you can pause, you can debug as you go through it. But all the results are still coming back, as you say, as records into a Salesforce system, be it your own or a new one, your videos, your screenshots, all of it in one place in a system you know how to use because you're a Salesforce expert. And we don't just say observe, we can actually execute as well. We've got a new product called Provar Grid that lets us fire off test in parallel. So if you had 1,000 test cases, instead of running in 12 hours, they could be run with 16 parallel threads. You could run them in well under an hour, maybe in 30 minutes. I'm going to sort of let things slide here where it goes through all the different products we work with. Too many to mention. It's probably out of date already. We have a success portal. We use Experience Cloud for our users. We have a LMS, not quite Trailhead, but that's coming up. University Provar. We're going to let all the audience today have free access to this resource. We've written 4 modules on Trailhead for testing, explore software testing. We've got a link at the end if people want to access that. There's 8 more to come. I'm excited to reveal. And basically what we're doing is not just talking about our products. We talk about things like the webinar today. We talk about the regression gap. And much of the material today has come from our education team. It's come from what I learned looking at UP itself.
Nice. So everything on the university, or the majority of it, is platform agnostic. So you can really, get to grips.
There's a mix. We make it very clear when something's maybe a training guide for a specific product, maybe a trial guide, and other things are more like the Agile Testing quadrants, the regression gap, DevOps explained. If you're a tester and you don't know about DevOps, again, it's not all aimed at the expert user. We've got a variety of courses for different levels of experience.
Nice. And if you check out the chat, Amber's just put a link to that in there, into the
Thank you, Amber.
University of Provar.
The Provar me. Before we get onto AI, do we want to cover any Q&A questions?
Yes. I can pick out a couple. What are some of the best practices for testing lots of profiles with one scenario with slightly different results? Can you log in as other users?
Yes, I'm glad. I wish I'd put that question in there myself. So we use the Salesforce login as. So if you're in a sandbox, it's automatically granted. If it's production, you have to give access to a system admin user. So once you've got your connected app within Provar, you don't need to put username and password, connected app. You've got login as option. So in that login as, you can then put different usernames, and you can do that in a way that can be automated, so it can be dynamic. So by having that login as that user, the bigger difficulty is thinking about now, not just profiles, but we talked about this, order permission sets, how far do you want to go? There's a point where you get diminishing returns. So I think you have to think wisely that if you've got 50,000 users, you can't test every change. It's 50,000 users, unless you want to buy 50,000 grid licenses, which would be lovely. What I'd recommend is you think about the core sets of use cases, still the different types of users. But I think we have to be very careful as admins on orgs not to grant every single user a different set of permissions in our company. That would be irresponsible.
Yeah. And isn't there, forgive me, I'm not the admin content expert in our company, but there's something to do with the movement having to migrate some permissions on profiles or something like that. So
that's correct.
Yeah. So that's
the good news is you'd be able to reuse the same tests with Provar. So once you've written them, once you move that, you could actually verify before and after the same results would happen. That'd be a very good use for Provar automation.
I know I know you want to talk about AI, but do you want to have one more question while we're here?
Yeah. While we're on testing still, let's get there.
Yeah. End-to-end testing. This viewer has a web application that uses a shadow DOM, which is almost impossible to write tests with Selenium. The test that I want to write starts out with creating a user on my Flutter website and then verify that the user was created in Salesforce. How do you do that type of thing? I mean, it's quite specific, but you might have an answer that springs to you.
It's a technical answer. So we have something called NitroX. So NitroX is a name that we like. That's like Nitrox. It dives deeper into the shadow DOM. You can see where I came up with that one. I quite liked it. So it lets you penetrate the shadow DOM. So that feature lets you create a declarative mapping for elements based on their relative positions. So if we took a web page, that web page typically has components. So as long as we're able to anchor to a component, which we typically can, we can then relate to the fields and the buttons and the links within that component. That's fine. So we use that to relate to the items, and we don't just use what we call the DOM. We don't just use XPaths. We use things like CSS selectors and JavaScript selectors, getting quite technical. There are multiple ways we can do this. If they want to contact us to understand how we do it and how it would work for their application, please get in touch, and our pre-sales and our product team can talk to them about it. Or if they want to contact me directly via LinkedIn, Rich Clark 808, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, Facebook, you typically find me and I'll tell you basically how you can do it.
Good stuff. And there was another question that's, asking about building a solid testing strategy and process. Like a use case for it. Functional testing. How can we create the regression pipeline test cases for automated testing? Well, I think you saw a part of that in the demo, the video that Richard just showed. There's
much more to it. Again, get in touch. What we typically do for customers is we'll take them through an initial demo after qualifying what their needs are, which products they're interested in. And we'll then typically take a proof of value. So they'll come to the two scenarios they find particularly difficult to understand how to test. We'll create those tests and show them how we did it. And then it's kind of, they can then play with themselves. They can have a trial and say, is it as easy to do as your experts can do it? Because those vendors go bing, 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 bing. And then you go back afterwards, you think, how did they do that? How do I get started? We let people get a hands-on test drive as well.
Nice. All right.
On to AI. So when we're talking about AI in testing, it's very, very, like every single technology at the moment, it's very popular. And it has been in AI, it has been in testing for a long time because there's a lot of manual effort typically involved. But if we think about the following, which of these are intelligent? The ability to generate test cases and the data to go with them. The ability to recognize what page you are on an application, what the application is. The ability to know what's a button, what's a link, what's an input field, what's an aura field, what's a Lightning Web Component, what's a visual force field, what's a standard page layout. The ability to not only recognize the elements, but know how to navigate through Salesforce with tabs and app launchers and everything else to actually get to that element to test it without having to map all those steps. The ability to, once you've got to the right page, find where is, say, the edit button within this component, within this accordion section, within this tab. How do I get there to actually hit the button in the first place? And then when something changes, when the metadata changes, to automatically run the tests that actually relate to that metadata without having to say go or run or anything. Now, these are all intelligent, in my opinion, but there's no machine learning. There's no large language model behind it. There's no natural language, well, there is some natural language process, but not an E6 behind it. But it's all smart, it's all intelligent, but it's all using algorithms. It's using documented ways that are reliable, that are trusted APIs by Salesforce to do it. If we think about what is AI, though, generative AI is a buzzword. We've got a whole conference about it. Perhaps they'll mention Salesforce while they're doing it at the same time. But we already do the scenario creation from those user story texts. In the release this week, this may be the first place you hear about it publicly, so I hope it does happen. In beta, we have a ability to look at a failure of, say, an Apex unit test. In the future, we want to do it for Provar tests as well, and we want to do it for flows. But in this release, it's Apex unit tests. We can actually click a button, a root cause button, and it will tell you why that unit test failed and potentially what you have to do to fix it. Other projects are doing very similar things as well. That's great. We can all use the same feature, but obviously our feature is aimed at the testers for them to understand and go to the developer and say, oh, there's a problem with this unit test that was run last night, this morning on demand. And this is where it's suggesting it might be wrong. In the future, we want to have something called Copilot. We want to be helping testers do their job better. We want to assist them with that kind of insight to an application. Things like natural language processing, we already have test descriptions that tell you in English what the test does, so you don't have to learn Java or Python or any languages. We already do up to 12 different languages. So when you create a test, you can actually run it in French, German, Italian, Spanish, Japanese. I don't know them all. There's quite a lot of languages. But when we do that, we're providing those translations. What I want to do next is if someone wants to do a translation to Welsh, Cornish, anything, Intui, whatever they want to use, if it's supported by Salesforce, I don't want to go away and build that language pack. I want to just go use the AI to get those translations and run that test in that desired language. In the future, what I want to do with natural language processing is to say, right, this is the test you run. This is what I think. This is what I think it means. So when we run tests, there may be some errors. Can we deploy to production? Does this matter? So being able to actually give some advice to people about what does this mean? We don't have to have zero defects to deploy, but what is the impact of those tests that have failed on our business? And lastly, that feeds into expert systems. We already have this thing called Provar Grid that helps you optimize your tests. It'll run the tests that are new. It'll run the tests that break most often or fail most often first. And the things that actually always work, it will run later. So you can react much faster. Where we're taking that is using things like Einstein analytics to do some analysis. Are the tests that are breaking, are they breaking because they're badly written tests? Are they breaking because it's a badly written application? And then the dream goal is to actually not do any testing. And this is why I talk about quality. If I can shift fully left, and as soon as someone's writing a user requirement, if I can predict how testable it is or whether I think it's going to work based on the solution and the acceptance criteria, that would be the ultimate shift left for me, is that 30 times reduction in cost.
Yes, the crystal ball.
Indeed. That's the payback. It's all about user outcomes, not about selling licenses. Sorry, but that's the truth. That's what the goal is. Just some links if people want to take a screenshot of that one. But as you say, I think Amber's putting all those links. There's the Provar Me register if you want to join our University of Provar. There's Trailhead Trail Mix there for the 4 courses. So that's the one we add all the new courses to. And a lot of the content comes from Up as well. There's far more. There's like 70 courses in Up, I think. Provar Thought Leadership Series. We do a series of blogs, not always about testing, not always about AI. A lot of mine are, I'm afraid. But our Chief People Officer, Lisa, writes about HR issues. Our Chief Finance Officer writes about things as a CFO of an ISV company. So there's lots in there. Hopefully people get some value out of as well. Plus all the great content on SalesforceBen, of course, that you have in addition.
Right. Well, I'm glad that we managed to answer a few questions while it was still, I suppose, contextual with the webinar, but I'll just go through the remaining ones about Provar. It'll be a little bit quick, Clara. So you obviously want to expand on anything.
I'll give short answers.
Right. How does performance impact being identified with Provar? And how can an engineer find a root cause?
Oh, okay. So firstly, one of the big reasons for test failing is performance. Salesforce performance is variable. And we have a thing called wait for. So we'll wait for an element to appear before testing it, before we time out. Plus there's retries. In terms of how you analyze performance, the Provar Manager product will capture all the results. So over time, you should never look at just two executions. Over time, you can see any spikes or changes. And then the root cause analysis in the future, I'd like to actually look at those performance issues, but you've probably got a change. And if you've got you've got a list of the performance of the test case, how long it takes to run, and you know what metadata changes are deployed all in one place. That's why we call it the quality hub, not the testing hub. That's, I think, the answer for that person. That's what we've built that to solve.
Nice. Does Provar plug into Bitbucket's pipelines? And yeah,
yes.
You answered that. Yeah.
Yes, it was on the video as well. If you watch it slowly, it's Bitbucket, Bamboo, everything, GitHub Actions, GitLab, Circle CI, Jenkins. Yeah, all those things.
And sorry, I'm just laughing at this one because you probably know what it means, but I have no idea. Can we use BDD, cucumber / gherkin? Sounds like my sandwich for lunch, to write test cases to drive the automation in Provar?
100%. Yeah, so great use case. So it's basically behavior-driven development is very much about saying, given this, then that, but this. So it's a way of describing a scenario. That feature with the user story generates a gherkin script, which you then automate in the automation tool. But people can also create their own and modify those or import them from other systems. So 100%, yes.
Great. Provar, does it have a cloud version?
The Provar Manager is the cloud version. So where we're heading with our roadmap, I haven't made a secret of this last year. We're taking automation. We're plugging that test builder into the Provar Manager. That's our future platform our customers will wear off. That's what we're building for the future. So yes, it's cloud-based for the whole delivery team, but the IDE, the automation tool, is for the QA team is very much still a desktop tool. Because you want to be able to test behind your firewall, you want to test your databases. So there'll always be some element that's a developer tool as such, but we're moving more of that into that cloud-based Salesforce application.
Great. And I know we're just over time, so I'll ask one more question. Do you have partners that, assume this is an end user organization, do they have partners that they can work with to deliver with Provar and all the...
Absolutely. So we've got our own team. It's very limited. So we don't have a lot of availability, tend to be the experts, but like program architects. But yes, we have a rich suite of partners. So please, if you're an existing customer, contact your customer success manager. They can refer to a partner in your region. And this is why we've done things like UP, so people get certified in Provar. So you can go to a partner and say, how many Provar certifications, how many people have you done, how many projects? Sound like consultants on the App Exchange? Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We copied the model. Good reason.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow. And that was a lot to fit into 1 hour. Yeah, I mean, people are appreciating it. So thank you so much, Richard, for sharing all of that. And again, for the fantastic diagrams. I love a visual.
Yeah. I'll do a little plug. I'm on another webinar in 3.5 hours. So the Lambda Test Mu conference. I'm on a panel with some of our competitors. So if you Google Lambda Test Mu, MU, you'll find me as a panelist session in about 3.5 hours time as well. But thank you, Lucy. I really appreciate the questions and those of our audience today.
Good luck with the panel. And yes, thanks again. And thanks everyone for joining.